Have you ever noticed how the mind speaks even when you are silent? Not with words you choose, but with whispers that rise like smoke from an unseen fire. They creep in softly, without permission, until they form a fog thick enough to cloud your vision. This is how negativity works, not as a loud intruder, but as a quiet guest who overstays. There is one thing, one hidden root, that silently feeds this fog. It is not the world outside, not the people around you, not even the storms that life throws your way. It is something more subtle. It is your attachment to the voice inside, the one you never question, the one you call yourself. Negative thoughts rarely arrive with thunder, nor do they crash into your life like a storm you can clearly see and prepare for. Instead, they come in whispers, subtle and quiet, so soft that you almost do not notice them at first. They disguise themselves as your own voice, echoing in the chambers of your mind, making you believe they are part of who you are. This is what makes them so powerful. If negativity shouted loudly at you, you would resist it immediately. You would recognize it as foreign, as an intruder. But because it enters silently, cloaked in the language of your own self-talk, you accept it without question, and once accepted, it begins to grow roots within you. It starts small. A single thought on an ordinary morning, perhaps as you look in the mirror or step into your day. A whisper that says, "You're not ready for this," or "You're not as good as them." You shrug it off, but it lingers, weaving itself into the background of your awareness. Then, the next time you face a challenge, that whisper resurfaces, now with a little more weight. Soon, it no longer feels like a passing idea, but a part of your identity. That is the trap negativity thrives in disguise. It convinces you that it is not just a thought. It is you. This illusion is reinforced by repetition. Thoughts repeated often enough feel like truth. When you tell yourself something again and again, even unconsciously, it begins to carve a path in the mind. Like footsteps across grass, a trail forms, and soon it becomes the path you take every time. Without realizing it, you condition yourself to walk the road of doubt, fear, and self-criticism simply because it is familiar. The silence of negative thoughts is their greatest strength, because in that silence they build consistency, and in that consistency they gain control. You may notice how these thoughts shape your emotions. A single belief like, "I am not enough," doesn't just stay in your head, it colors your mood, your energy, and your outlook on the entire day. You wake up feeling heavy without knowing why. You interact with people carrying an invisible shield, doubting their intentions, questioning your worth, and yet, if asked, you cannot point to anything external that caused this heaviness. That is because the source is internal, the whisper you allowed to sit comfortably in your mind. The most dangerous lies are not the ones told by others, but the ones we tell ourselves in silence over time. This pattern builds momentum. What began as a small whisper evolves into a narrative, a story you unconsciously tell about yourself and the world. I never succeed. People always overlook me. Things never work out for me. These are not facts, but repeated whispers that grew into beliefs. Once they become beliefs, they filter everything you see. Opportunities appear, but you doubt them. Compliments are given, but you dismiss them. Challenges arise, and you interpret them as confirmation that your negative story was true all along. The whisper that began as nothing more than a fleeting thought now has the power to shape your reality. The silence of these thoughts is deceptive. Because they are quiet, they are often left unchecked. You do not challenge them, you do not pause to ask, "Is this really true?" Instead, you internalize them as part of your inner dialogue. In this way, negativity doesn't need to be loud to control you. It only needs to be persistent, patient, and subtle. Like water dripping on stone, it erodes your strength not through force, but through time. And because it hides in the familiar sound of your own inner voice, you do not resist it. You embrace it, not realizing you are nurturing the very thing that weakens you. The most dangerous part of negativity is not the presence of the thought itself, but the attachment you form to it, the way you claim it as your own. A thought by itself has no real power. It is like a cloud passing through the sky, weightless, temporary, and without substance. But the moment you say, "This is mine, this is me," that thought transforms into something more solid, something that anchors itself into your identity. It is not the passing shadow that weakens you. It is the way you mistake the shadow for your own reflection. In this subtle mistake, the thought receives strength, and in time, it becomes a force that directs your emotions, your actions, and even your perception of who you are. Imagine the mind as a vast open space. Thoughts float through it like leaves carried by the wind. Some are uplifting, some are neutral, and some are heavy with doubt or fear. By nature, they are simply visitors, not residents. They arrive, they linger, and they pass. But when a negative thought appears and you grasp it tightly, you invite it to stay. You give it shelter, feed it with your attention, and soon it begins to multiply. What was once just a single thought becomes a habit of thinking, and that habit becomes an identity you cannot seem to escape. You no longer say, "I had a negative thought." You begin to say, "I am this kind of person." This shift in language is subtle, but it is the point where attachment transforms negativity into reality. The identification with thoughts happens so quietly that most people are unaware it is even taking place. A whisper rises within, "You are not enough." Instead of questioning it, you nod in agreement. A voice says, "You will fail," and you do not dismiss it as noise. You adopt it as a prediction. A suggestion arises, "No one really values you," and you wear it like a label. Each time you agree with the thought, you strengthen the chain that binds you to it. This silent agreement is the real fuel that allows negativity to grow. The thought itself is powerless until you lend it your belief. Without that belief, it would simply drift away like smoke in the wind. The danger of identification is that it closes the gap between who you are and what you think. When you fuse the two, you stop seeing thoughts as temporary and start living as if they are permanent. The truth, however, is that you are not your thoughts. You are the space in which thoughts appear. Just as the sky is not defined by the clouds that pass through it, you are not defined by the negativity that occasionally crosses your mind. But when you forget this, you let every dark cloud dictate the weather of your inner world, even though the vastness of your mind was always clear and boundless beneath it. This attachment not only feeds negative thoughts, but also blinds you to reality. When you believe, "I always fail," your mind begins to ignore every success you've had. When you believe, "No one cares," you overlook every moment of kindness you have received. The attachment edits your perception, filtering everything through the lens of the belief you have accepted. In this way, negativity sustains itself not through truth, but through selective attention. You begin to live in a story created by your agreement with the thought, rather than in the reality that exists outside of it. What keeps this cycle alive is that the attachment feels natural. You rarely pause to ask whether the thought is true, because it feels like it came from within you. But just because a thought arises in your mind does not mean it belongs to you. Thoughts are shaped by memory, by influence, by habit, by the world you move through every day. They are not pure reflections of your essence, yet by claiming them as your identity, you allow them to dictate how you feel, what you do, and who you believe you are becoming. The power was never in the thought. The power was always in your decision to identify with it. Attention works like oxygen to the fire of the mind. Whatever you focus on, whatever you feed with your awareness, grows stronger and more dominant. A single negative thought can arise like a spark, small and seemingly harmless, but the moment your attention rests on it, the spark begins to glow brighter. You replay it, you analyze it, you measure yourself against it, and without realizing it, you breathe life into it again and again. This is how something so small turns into something overwhelming. Not because it carried great strength to begin with, but because your attention became its fuel. Where attention goes, energy flows, and where energy flows, reality is shaped. Consider the moments when a doubtful thought slips into your mind. Perhaps it tells you that you are not capable of completing the task in front of you, or that you will fail like before, or that you are being judged by others. If you simply let the thought appear and disappear, it holds no weight. But often, you linger on it. You replay the memory of when you struggled before. You imagine all the ways you could fail again. You picture the embarrassment of being seen as less. In that replay, in that inner rehearsal of failure, the thought grows roots. It feels heavier, more real, because you invested your awareness into it. Without attention, the thought would have vanished like a cloud drifting across the sky. With attention, it becomes a storm cloud that follows you everywhere. The mind does not distinguish between what is imagined and what is real in the same way the body does. When you pour your focus into a negative thought, your emotions respond as if it were happening now. Your body tenses, your heart rate shifts, your energy drains, all because you gave attention to an illusion that your mind then interpreted as truth. This is why the same thought, repeated in your focus, can create lasting anxiety, sadness, or anger even when nothing externally has changed. The fire was never in the world. It was in your decision to keep feeding the flame inside with the oxygen of attention. This cycle often begins unconsciously. You may not even realize how much attention you give to your inner dialogue. A passing comment from someone might trigger a thought, and instead of letting it pass, you carry it for hours, dissecting it from every angle. Each time you return to it, you add another layer of fuel. Soon, it is no longer just the original comment bothering you, but the entire mental story you built around it. What could have dissolved in a moment instead lingers for days, all because attention turned it into something far larger than it was meant to be. Attention, when misdirected, creates the illusion that negative thoughts are powerful. But the truth is, they draw their strength only from the focus you give them. The same way a fire cannot survive without air, a thought cannot survive without attention. This is why moments of distraction or flow, where your attention is deeply absorbed in something else, often make negativity vanish. It is not that the thought has been solved, it simply has not been fed. In this lies the key. The power is never in the thought itself, but in what you choose to give your awareness to. When you consistently direct attention to negativity, you carve a pathway in the brain. Just like a trail formed by repeated footsteps, it becomes the route the mind walks automatically. Soon, it is no longer a conscious choice, but a conditioned habit. Negativity arises, and attention rushes to it by default, strengthening it once again. Yet the opposite is also true. When you deliberately shift attention away, when you refuse to fuel the thought, its hold begins to weaken. The fire fades not because you fought it, but because you stopped feeding it. In this way, attention is not just fuel, it is also the extinguisher, depending on how you choose to use it. Negativity does not always strike in dramatic waves, it often accumulates in silence, layer by layer, the way dust gathers on a mirror. At first, the surface is clear, reflecting your true self, your possibilities, your vision of life. But as days pass, a fine layer of dust begins to settle. Small doubts, little fears, passing insecurities. They are so light that you barely notice them, yet they remain. Over time, one layer becomes two become many, and suddenly the reflection you once saw clearly is distorted. You look into the mirror and no longer recognize the brightness of your own face. What you see instead is filtered through the grime of unchallenged thoughts, each one dulling your ability to perceive yourself accurately. This dust does not arrive dramatically, it comes with subtlety. A thought that says you are not doing enough, a memory of a time you failed, a comparison with someone else who seems better than you. These specks feel harmless in isolation, but when left to sit, they accumulate. The problem is not that thoughts arise, the problem is that you never wipe them away. You leave them untouched, and so they build a film over your mind. Eventually, you mistake the dust for the mirror itself. You think the distortion is the truth. The negativity becomes the lens through which you interpret your life, and you stop realizing that your true reflection lies beneath. The metaphor of dust is important because dust is passive. It does not crash down with force. It does not demand attention. It simply settles. This is the danger of negative thoughts. They settle quietly in the background of your consciousness, convincing you that their presence is natural. And just as a dusty mirror requires consistent cleaning to remain clear, the mind requires conscious awareness to remain free from distortion. Without this effort, negativity becomes so ingrained that it feels like part of who you are, rather than something separate that can be cleared away over time. This build-up influences the way you respond to life. When your reflection is clouded, you approach opportunities with hesitation, relationships with mistrust, and challenges with fear. The dust alters not only how you see yourself, but also how you see the world around you. A kind word may not feel genuine, a success may not feel significant, a new possibility may appear threatening instead of inspiring. None of this is because reality has changed. It is because your mirror has become layered with distortions. The danger is that you begin to live in the distortion, forgetting the clarity that was always beneath it. This is why some people carry heaviness without knowing why. They may not be able to point to one defining failure or trauma, yet they feel an unshakable weight pressing down on them. The reason is the accumulation. Dozens of small, unchecked thoughts layered over years, each one adding a little more dust to the glass. Negativity is not always the product of one great blow, it is often the slow, quiet result of neglecting the little whispers that settle daily. Left unchallenged, they change the entire way you perceive yourself, until the distorted reflection becomes the only one you recognize. But the truth remains that the mirror underneath the dust never disappears. Your clarity, your strength, your deeper self are always there, waiting to be seen. The dust may cover it, but it cannot destroy it. Each negative thought is only a particle resting on the surface, and like dust, it can be removed with awareness, attention, and deliberate effort. The challenge lies in remembering that the dust is not who you are, it is only what has settled on top of who you are. By realizing this, you understand that the power was never in the dust itself, but in whether you allowed it to remain on the mirror of your mind. When a negative thought arises, most people instinctively try to fight it. They argue with it, they resist it, they push against it, as if battling an enemy. But this struggle often strengthens the thought rather than weakens it. Fighting makes it feel more real, more powerful, as though it has substance worth engaging with. The truth is that freedom from negativity does not come by wrestling with thoughts, but by refusing to claim them as yours in the first place. A thought is only a visitor. It does not belong to you unless you invite it in, give it a name, and allow it to stay. When you say, "This is my fear, my doubt, my sadness," you build a home for it in your mind. But when you see it as something passing through, you create space between who you are and what appears in your awareness. Imagine sitting by the side of a busy road. Cars rush past in every direction. Each car represents a thought, some bright and inspiring, some neutral and ordinary, and some dark with negativity. You cannot control which cars appear on the road, just as you cannot control which thoughts enter your mind, but you can decide whether to step into traffic or simply observe from a distance. When you chase after the cars, when you try to stop them, you get pulled into the chaos. But when you sit still and let them pass, you realize they are not yours to hold. Negativity loses its grip when you choose not to climb into the vehicle it offers. The habit of ownership is what keeps negative thoughts alive. A thought like, I am not good enough, floats into awareness, and instead of saying, here is a thought, you say, I am not good enough. That small shift of language is what creates bondage. The first way leaves the thought separate from you, a temporary visitor. The second way fuses the thought with your identity. Once it becomes part of your identity, it no longer feels like an idea, it feels like truth. From there, you begin to live according to it, even though it was never anything more than a momentary ripple in the mind. This is why detachment is not about ignoring negativity, but about seeing it clearly. To say, this thought is not mine, does not mean denial, it means recognition of its true nature. A thought arises because of memory, conditioning, environment, or even random activity of the brain. It does not prove anything about who you are. By learning to watch without ownership, you create a distance between yourself and the constant stream of mental chatter. In that space, the power of negative thoughts begins to dissolve on its own. They pass like clouds, leaving the vastness of the sky untouched. This shift changes the way you experience yourself. Instead of being a prisoner of every passing thought, you become the observer of them. You are no longer dragged down by every negative whisper, because you no longer confuse the whisper with your true self. The thought may say, you cannot handle this, but you recognize it as only a sound in the mind, not a command. The thought may say, you will fail again, but you see it as a memory echo, not a prophecy. By refusing ownership, you reclaim authority over your inner world. You realize that thoughts will always come and go, but they cannot define you unless you allow them to. It is this act of stepping back that creates freedom. The negative thoughts do not need to be destroyed, they only need to be seen for what they are, temporary visitors, not permanent truths. When you no longer call them yours, they no longer have the power to chain you. They simply drift, like shadows passing across the ground, leaving no mark on who you really are. The quiet chain that binds people to negativity is not the thought itself, but the agreement they unconsciously make with it. A thought by nature is fleeting, like wind brushing past the skin. It has no weight until you decide to hold it, no authority until you give it permission to speak for you. The moment you agree, the moment you nod internally and say, yes, this is true about me, the chain is formed. It is a chain without sound, without visible force. Yet it holds you tightly because it is built from your own belief. This agreement is what transforms a passing suggestion into a prison that shapes how you feel, how you act, and how you see the world. Think of how easily this process begins. A voice rises inside saying, you are not capable. On its own, it is just a string of words, no more powerful than a sentence written in the sand. But when you agree, when you give it weight by believing it, those words carve themselves into stone. The agreement makes them part of your reality. Every time you face a challenge afterward, that thought returns, reminding you of the contract you signed with it. You hesitate, you hold back, you shrink, not because the world has declared you incapable, but because you silently agreed with the whisper that told you so. This agreement often happens beneath awareness. You do not say the words out loud. You do not consciously decide to accept the thought, but the act of not questioning it is itself an agreement.